Men are haunted by the vastness of eternity. And so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the centuries? Will strangers hear our names long after we're gone and wonder who we were, how bravely we fought, how fiercely we loved?
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. Today we have something very special in store that I am not only passionate about, but that I have never personally actually put to the test, and that is bronze swords, specifically the design of Achilles' sword from the Troy film from I think the early 2000s. Now growing up as a kid, I actually was a big fan of this film, and I love the fight scene between Achilles and Hector. It's one of my favorite, fights ever put to film. Now when it comes to the blade itself, I'm a really big fan of the design and the aesthetic of it, but I've always wanted to see how practical it is and put it to the test. Now this particular one here is just a 3D printed replica that I made. It may look very, very nice on camera, but it's not a real sword. But the reason why I created this is because it is a 1-to-1 replica from the exact same specifications as the one from the film that we will be using as a reference point. I'll get into the reasons as to why a little bit later, but for now I thought I should just mention this is not necessarily the one that we're going to be testing in today's episode. First time trying out a bronze sword, and additionally it is the Achilles sword, one of my favorite sword designs ever. So with that out of the way, let's get started with today's episode. So just before we actually build our Achilles blade, let's talk a little bit about bronze, the material itself, because I found this quite interesting personally, right? I have worked with almost every material that you could possibly imagine. Steel, stainless steel, Damascus steel, hardened steel, titanium, brass, copper, gold, silver, platinum, meteorite, you name it. I've worked with all of them. But bronze is the one material that I have just never personally used or even had to work with before. And I think that speaks to an interesting point, because it's actually not that common in the world today. Any sort of application that bronze might have had has usually been taken up by something like brass, and a lot of the times people may even mistake brass for bronze. So what actually is bronze? Well, predominantly it is comprised of copper with a little bit of tin mixed in. That's how historically we would have made and cast bronze swords. But in the more modern context, there is also obviously different other types. The one that immediately comes to mind is aluminum bronze, that being predominantly copper with a little bit of aluminum mixed in. Now the reason why I bring all of this up is because one of the biggest roadblocks that I actually ran into today's project that really frustrated me was actually getting some bronze. It was a lot more difficult than I ever thought it was, and I don't know why. And the reason why I explained what it's comprised of is because copper is not that expensive. Now, these numbers are very loose just off the top of my head, but let's just say it's around about $15 to $20 per kilo of copper. Very cheap. Tin is a little bit more expensive, but because obviously you're not actually using that much, it's a very small amount relative to the copper, it's also not that expensive. Yet, when I tried to buy the appropriate lengths and thicknesses of bronze to be able to make Achilles' blade, I was getting quoted hundreds of dollars. Hundreds of dollars. And I have no idea why. I really can't figure out why bronze is so expensive. My best guess is because it is not as mass manufactured as things like obviously steel, aluminum, brass, and just regular copper obviously. That commands a premium, but why it commands a premium so much higher than the base material it's comprised of, I have no idea. My original plan was to cast my own blade, but if I did that, I would have to buy a whole bunch of smelting material, which costs hundreds of dollars. Then if I was to buy just a flat bar of bronze and machine my own blade out, it would cost hundreds of dollars. So the cheapest option for me, the cheapest option was actually just to buy a bronze blade that was already a raw cast. So the first thing that we need to do with our bare bronze blade is actually take it to the angle grinder with a sanding disc. Yes, there's a lot of defects from the casting process. There's high spots, low spots, all that sort of stuff. So we're just going to start sanding that away to get a nice, consistent and smooth finish on the blade itself. This was pretty quick, honestly. It really actually was a lot easier than you would have had to do a couple of thousand years ago. Then following on from this, trying to clean up some of obviously that raw casting, I'm going to grab the Dremel tool with a bunch of different little heads and go into some of the finer details to kind of smooth out a lot of that, obviously that roughness. Then I'll hit it with a quick Scotch-Brite pad to kind of, bring out some of that nice shine to it. I also found that a steel wire brush was also really helpful to get into some of the areas that were just really hard to reach, because obviously I didn't want to sand back too much of the material and take too much off, but I also wanted the finish to look good. It meant something like the wire brush was able to get in there without necessarily taking away a bunch of material. The next thing that I decided to do was work on the handle for a little while. Now, the blade is not finished. We're going to come back to that and finish it off, but I wanted to get a nice handle onto it first. So I decided to go about it by creating what I would consider to be wood scales to go on either side, this way that the tang would remain nice and thick, while at the same time having a good, comfortable handle. Now, with a bronze blade, you could cast a handle onto it, you could cast a handle separately, you could make a wood handle, or you could make wood scales. A lot of different ways to do it. I just wanted to try and put wood scales on because I felt like that would be the most robust method for me personally. And so I traced out the design of the handles, cut it out on the bandsaw, took it over to the belt sander, started sanding it away. Then I got into the finer details with the Dremel tool, dyed it black, and I didn't like it at all. I really just didn't like it. It didn't really feel nice in the hand. I didn't like the profile, the shape. So I just decided to make things easier for me, and it would probably look a lot better to just 3D print the handles. Just got a 3D model, got them to the exact size and shape that I wanted, and then printed them at the highest resolution I could. After this, I did some acetone smoothing. Now, depending on what, filament you're using, this may work or not. So what I did was put some acetone on a damp rag and just essentially smoothed out all of the parts. This will remove a lot of the print lines and make it look like a very nicely professional finished piece. So after the handle scales were finished, I essentially just epoxied them to the blade. This epoxy I've used countless different times for countless different projects. It is super strong, so I have no doubt at all that they will be able to hold up to essentially everything. And they also allowed me to, the best way I could describe this is cocoon the handle in the epoxy as well, so it actually gives it a nice three-dimensional shape. And obviously we have that large, very large and thick tang in between, so I have no doubt that this will be able to handle, pun intended, everything that we throw at it. So with the handle firmly attached, it is time to finish the blade itself. And this is where we get into obviously one of the interesting aspects of bronze, and that is work hardening. Now, when it comes to obviously a sword or a blade, if your edge is very soft, then when you hit things like bone or armor or even another blade, you're going to have a really bad time. But one of the things that you can do with bronze is work harden it, meaning repeatedly striking the same area over and over will actually give that particular area a higher level of hardness compared to the rest of the material. So what I'm going to do is take the blade over to the anvil and with a very small hammer start repeatedly striking all along the edge where I want it to gain additional hardness. Now I obviously need to do this multiple times on both edges of the blade. Now this next part is really important because we've just hardened the edge. It means that when I take it over to the belt sander to remove a lot of the the hammer blows while also sharpening it up, I can't get the blade too hot, because if I get the blade too hot, we're going to anneal it, which is essentially going to undo the hardening we just did. So I need to keep the blade very cold, very cool, go very slow. It turned out really well. Now for the last and final couple of steps, all I did was obviously take some sandpaper, some Scotch-Brite and some polish to the blade to get a nice beautiful finish on it, ready for testing. Then when it came to the handle, because I wanted to get some of those details to obviously the movie prop 100% accurate, I put some brass little tubing into the handle itself just to complete the look, and then a little bit of that fluorescent green to mimic some of the oxidization that we see on the original movie prop. And with that being said, our bronze Achilles sword is ready for testing. So we have our bronze Achilles blade out here ready for testing. Very interesting weight profile. It feels very much what I would expect like a copper blade to be made of. Obviously, This is bronze, but you get what I'm saying generally speaking. Now, when it comes to the design of the blade, I feel like there's a couple of things that we should mention first and foremost. Let's start with the length, because I created this one-to-one replica of the one from the film, specifically so we could use it as reference for size, because this one, as you can tell, is kind of a little bit shorter, especially when we compare it to the one-to-one. So the one in the films is around about, I think, 71-ish centimeters long, and that's exactly how long and big this one is here. I'm actually pretty happy with how it came out. I think it looks really cool. So much so that I actually want one made in bronze. But this one here is around about 60 centimeters. Now, you might be thinking that is a little bit short, and you are correct, that is short. However, it is still within tolerance for real bronze blades. From what I can tell, I've had a look at a lot of the, the different museum pieces, specifically for a lot of the leaf blade sort of designs, and they come in at a variety of different ranges, but we're talking somewhere in and around from the 58 to 80 centimeter mark. Like, that's what I've seen as a good spread, right? Now, this one is obviously on a little bit of that shorter end, but historically speaking, it's still within the range. So for testing purposes, for all that sort of stuff, it's completely valid. But it is important to note that it is not as big as the original one from the Troy film. Now, with that being said, I did want to show you guys how it actually compares to other sized blades. So this particular blade here is probably one of the shortest blades that I own, and that is the Dark Sister one. I would actually say this is really close to arming sword length. It just obviously has a little bit of a longer handle, right? But it's actually one of my shorter blades. You can see how it compares to something like this. And even if we compare it to the original one-to-one from the films, it's still really, really short. So just in general, right, this type of blade, both being bronze and obviously leaf blade type stuff, they are just shorter than obviously something like a long sword, right? Now, when it comes to the design of the blade, there are a couple of, I would say, important notes to talk about, because it's a very interesting leaf blade design, right? It's obviously not very standard. It has quite a large area where we have that kind of gentle curve. It is actually used a lot more for thrusting. It's a very acute point. And obviously in the film, Achilles' fighting style is very thrust-centric, so that makes sense for it. We do have that tapered waist here, which gives it that leaf blade shape, if we're being very generous about it, but it doesn't actually feel in the hand quite like a regular leaf blade. I would say the weight distribution is kind of somewhere around about here. It's a little bit different than a standard leaf blade. Then when it comes to the geometry, because we're using a material like bronze, it's not steel, it's not heat treated, I mean, we can harden the edge, but apart from that, it is kind of a softer and more malleable material that doesn't have a lot of flex to it, which means that, well, how do you create strength? Well, you create strength through geometry, through its structure. So if we actually look down the blade, right, we have that central ridge, and then it has what I would consider to be a very axe-like edge geometry, kind of lenticular, very curved, like a subtle curve. This means that when you have the chopping motion, it's going to cut kind of like an axe, while at the same time having a lot of meat behind the edge, so it's kind of strong, at least for the material type, and then we have that central ridge that gives us the structural rigidity of the blade. If you're enjoying today's episode, you really should consider subscribing. He's leaking over there. The Achilles jump can be done, I guess. So just before we continue on the geometry discussion, let's talk a little bit about actually using this blade in the context. Trust me, they will dovetail back into one another. So let's talk about it. This one here doesn't have what you would consider to be like a crossguard, right? The hand protection on this is nothing to write home about, but it does have obviously these flared sections, which generally speaking, I do actually think on this particular one could redirect some of those blows if they were going to hit your hands. On this side, not so much. But the context here is how you would actually use this particular blade, because it is something that you would pair with something like a shield, right? You would sword and board it, which not only helps with some of the reach, it being shorter, but also means that your hand protection can be obviously not as robust as something else. So in terms of its hand protection, it is kind of what you would expect for this particular blade. Now, what about your hand slipping onto the blade and cutting your fingers off? Well, because we have this very, very aggressive contouring on the handle, you would have to not only break your own grip, go up, over, all the way up here just to get to the blade. So I think that it's perfectly fine. You're not going to be slipping onto the blade, essentially. Now, how would you actually fight with a blade like this? Well, there are techniques that you can employ when it comes to a blade without a guard. For example, instead of if I was to block like normal, where I would normally have like a cross guard here, I could perhaps go for a hanging guard, which deflects the blade down that way. It should go without saying, in addition to blocking, you can also, of course, parry a blade. So there are ways to use a blade like this without, a really robust hand protection that is going to minimize your hand getting hit. Dovetailing back into the geometry discussion, this central ridge here would also provide more strength and a little bit of meat, I guess is the way I would describe it. If you were to block with another blade, that central ridge on the flat will give you a little bit more structure and also give you a little bit more leeway so you're not damaging, obviously, the flat of the blade, or if you have to, the edge of the blade, right? Achilles is a very thrust-centric type character, and this blade mirrors that perfectly while still incorporating elements of the leaf blade shape, which I'm a big fan of. When it comes to the handle, it's kind of comfortable, but I've also found that with techniques you can obviously do things like thumbing the blade, so I'm actually quite happy with it. But with that being said, let's cut with it now. I know I've been talking a lot. Let's cut. Next up, let's try some of the thrusting with this tip through gambeson. It should be able to get through pretty reasonably. It's quite sharp, it's quite robust. I have faith that it will be able to get through the gambeson. How easily, I don't know. Hopefully we don't hit the core, because I do think that we will obviously up the tip a little bit. Now, the reason why the thrusting needs to be perfect is because obviously that's what the geometry of this blade is kind of lending itself to, and it's what they wanted in Achilles' fight kind of style in the film, right? So let's see if it actually lives up to realistic thrusting. Oh shit, yeah. Yeah, that was great. That's not bad at all. That's actually, it's not as smooth, as nice as something like, one of our regular spring steel blades. But the truth is, for a bronze blade, which obviously doesn't have the same, thin sort of profile that it has, also a lot less weight, this is a lot more chonky, right? It means this is actually that is genuinely the best case scenario. Thrusts incredibly well, the tip has not deformed, so passes with flying colors. Generally speaking, for a material, it isn't wholly terrible at all. It's pretty good. There just are some limitations, and you can feel these limitations when you're actually using the blade, right? Like for example, somebody had a steel blade there, and I went to kind of strike into their blade. I know that I'm going to be taking huge gouges out. I can just feel by how the material moves and how you work with it. But barring those sorts of things, it should be able to handle a reasonable amount of stress. One of the biggest issues that I think that I would face with it personally is actually in the thrust. If I go for a thrust on something hard, for example, if I was to thrust here against Tony's helm, I have no doubt that this entire tip is going to either just bend or straight snap off. So I know that there's that limitation there, because it's kind of an experience thing, right? When you work with a lot of weapons, when you work with a lot of things, you can feel the limitations of the material. Like even doing that, I put a couple of little blunt spots on the bronze itself. I don't think you're gonna be able to see them on camera because they're incredibly small, but oh, there you go, you can see them there. Just those 3 little taps put those three little blunt spots. One more thing that I want to test the thrusting against before we move on, and that is crocodile hide. That did not get through. And there we go. So this is what I was talking about, that limitations, right, with the thrust. You get to a certain point where the material just can't handle it. But because of the type of material, we can just bend this back. Here, I just want to hit something a little bit more dense and fibrous. Now, this particular test does lend itself to this edge geometry because it is quite thick and axe-like, right? Slight little bit of warping in the blade. I mean, yeah, it does perform essentially like an axe. It's a dense, heavy material with a sharp edge on it. Coconut versus bronze. That one skimmed off a little bit. It was able to get through in the end, but that was a little bit more difficult than I first would have liked, honestly. As you can see, the blade is warping a little bit and you'll see the edge deformation there. So let's talk about gripping the Achilles sword, because this handle here is functional, but at the same time, it's not the most comfortable, especially when you're holding it kind of just like this, right? I have found personally that it gets super comfortable and super more maneuverable, obviously, the moment you actually start thumbing the blade. The moment you start doing this, all of a sudden, it feels fantastic in the hands, which I didn't actually super expect. So the maneuverability increases like tenfold the moment you apply some different techniques to it. I thought I should mention that because I've been really enjoying just using the blade, right? He's kind of just superhuman. I've even tried his jump before, like his jump move, how he jumps up and stabs down. It's very cool. It's like a Superman punch with a sword. It's one of those things where you're not really going to be able to probably pull it off in the real world, but generally speaking, it works perfectly for his character, right? And this is the sort of blade that I absolutely think accompanies that style perfectly. Next up, we have a ballistic head here. So what I think we'll do is we'll see what type of damage it does. I reckon we're probably going to be able to crack the skull because of the weight of the blade, right? So one right here. That is a split straight down your skull, right down there. A blade through the center of your skull. That's the Tyrion treatment. The nose, absolutely gone. Look at that, straight across there. Absolute brutality. Oh, jeez. You could feel every little bit of the blade going through the different bones and stuff. And it's like, if that was a real, This is an interesting episode for me because obviously this is the first time we're really taking a look at bronze, both personally and on the channel. And it performed, honestly, what I expected. Like I said, I've worked with a lot of these materials before. I've worked with copper, I've worked with brass, I've worked with a lot of these things individually. I've machined them, I've ground them, I've sanded them. So I have kind of a good idea at how it's going to go when I hit it against an object, when I try and cut with it. No, it's not going to be the sharpest thing in the world. No, it's not going to be able to handle insane stresses that we put other blades up to. But against a lot of softer mediums and softer targets, yeah, that's the context here. So obviously, taking that into consideration, I am quite happy with how this design performs. So with that out of the way, it is time to get to Tyrant's initial thoughts, score, or tits for short, starting off with comfort. Let's talk about the comfort. It wasn't that comfortable, but it wasn't bad. It was purely functional and nothing else, which is funny because the actual design of this handle, the shape of it, the cross section, is actually very similar to a lot of other cross sections I have on my long swords that I love, which is hexagonal, right? It still does have the same amount of edges, but because it's a lot more pronounced, it feels kind of like a diamond cross section. You can use it and it is functional. It's not the most comfortable. However, the moment you actually start to thumb the blade a little bit more, I actually really liked the comfort. It kind of changed the dynamics a bit. But just being completely honest with you guys, the comfort is average. So I'm gonna put the comfort at 7.5. Next up, let's talk about the design. Like I said, a little bit of biased, super into the design, absolutely love it. Now, there are a couple of aspects here that I think are worth noting, and that is obviously in terms of the handle shape and design, you're not going to be slipping onto the blade. It's contoured far too aggressively for that to ever happen, so you don't need to worry about it. And in terms of a guard, like we said, this here is not obviously as robust as other guards, but there are ways to use it that will mitigate your fingers getting smashed, and obviously you should have a shield with it. Context matters there. But generally speaking, I do think this probably would redirect a couple of blows from hitting your hands, which is good. The leaf blade aspect of it is kind of complex because I mean, like, would I call this a leaf blade? Technically, I guess, but when you look at the 1-to-1, for example, it has a very slim waist here that is very short. It's not a gradual transition. It doesn't, have a nice curve to it. It's kind of aggressive and abrupt, and then we have a very aggressive, thrusting point on it. So yes, it's a leaf blade. It's just kind of a weird one. My only gripe is I would like it to be a little bit longer. This here, this 1-to-1, is kind of the smallest I could go with this particular blade. But I'm super into it. So for the design, I think I will give it I'll give it a 9. I really am super into the design, and like I said, a little bit of bias there. Next up, let's talk about wieldability. You guys are probably going to be a little bit surprised about this, especially taking into context the comfort of it, right? I would actually give this a 10 out of 10 for wieldability. Moving this thing around feels fantastic in the hand. The blade is light and nimble enough that it just feels really nice. I'm trying to think of what I would describe it against, and like a leaf blade is obviously the closest, right? It is awesome to move this thing around. It's actually really enjoyable, and I think that's something that I haven't really experienced with. There's a bunch of swords that you'll move and be like, yeah, it's fine, it is what it is. This one I have a unique kind of enjoyment when I swing it around. Super fun. So the wieldability on this is definitely a 10 out of 10. And then last but not least, we get into the effectiveness. All right, this one is going to be the most complicated of all of today's ratings and rankings. And the reason why is because there's two different effectiveness scores here, I guess. For the effectiveness of the Achilles sword, right, this particular design, I think it's right up there. It's awesome. But the effectiveness of bronze is not that impressive, honestly. So I'm trying to figure out how we should actually rank it. Should we split them? Should we put them together? Because it means the score will get dragged down. I think what I'm going to do, because this is a technically fantasy, right? We're talking about, the Achilles blade. I'm going to rank the effectiveness of the Achilles design and factoring in not very much the bronze itself. The design itself, I love. It's super effective in the thrust, in the cut, feels great to move it around, light, nimble. I would like a little bit more. I'd like it to be closer to the one in the movie, honestly. The bronze is a little bit of a downside. Taking all that into consideration, I think for the effectiveness, I would give this the highest I could probably go, just because of the bronze aspect, is an 8 out of 10, which is sad because I love this blade. That gives us a final score of 34.5 out of 40. That's a little bit higher than I actually thought it was going to get, because I thought it was going to get dragged down a bit by a lot of the bronze aspects. Anyway, I think that's going to be all for today's episode. I had a lot of fun with this one. Achilles blade is one of my personal favorites. I can already tell that I really want one this size in real bronze. Oh man, this is not fun. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Let me know your comments down below. Let me know what you thought. And as always, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one. First time testing bronze on the channel. It was a lot of fun.